Welcome to our podcast, Interrogating Strategy with Denice Mqhayi. My guest today is Nolukhanyo Mqhayi, an energy expert, more specifically as an expert in energy financing. Welcome to the podcast, Nolukhanyo.
Thank you so much, Denice. I think, if I may, I'm very reluctant to be called an expert. We get quite a few of those in the industry. I'm an engineering professional within the energy finance space.
Well, you sound like an expert still.
Thank you.
Nolukhanyo, look, the podcast aims to shine light on some of the work that has been done at various levels in the country, public sector, private sector, in response to the energy crisis. So some of the questions that I'll be asking is really your strategic response as Nedbank to the Energy Action Plan. So again, you participated at a solar energy conference a few weeks ago. And what's your feedback on that? And what was your overall experience?
So the solar show, it took back a couple of weeks back when Nedbank was invited to speak on a number of issues that are of relevance to the South African energy industry. Nedbank obviously comes in as a commercial lender in the space where we provide financing solutions to clients that are looking to invest in energy projects, whether that's through generation or at utility scale, embedded generation, or at residential level. So a platform like the Solar Show is actually an important avenue for us to showcase what our product offerings, number one, but also beyond that, we get to interact with stakeholders in the industry. It might be solar panel suppliers that are investing in South Africa, that are providing the type of equipment that is installed in our projects that we finance. Developers as well are present in that event. So it's a great platform for us to come in, showcase what we are offering, engage with the industry in terms of what they're looking for in terms of financing products, who's doing what in the space, what are they planning to bring in, and also just tackle a number of issues related specifically to the energy crisis. You'll recall I spoke on a panel around energy efficiency.
Yeah.
And I mean, that space is a bit distant in terms of where I'm sitting within the bank, but it's very important to engage stakeholders at that level to see what are they planning, what are they looking for in terms of not just the assets that they want to put on their roofs or products that they want to put, in response to the energy crisis, but how do we come in, and at what stage can we come in to offer them the right kind of financing solutions that will assist them to take their projects forward. So it was overall quite a good platform. We made quite a few contact sessions, you yourself being one of them. And yeah, we generally enjoyed it, and we saw some amazing stuff being done and being brought into the country from manufacturers. It was good.
Just a follow-up question, talking about manufacturers. I mean, my observations are just dominated by players from Asian markets, from Asian countries rather. Yeah, what's your take on that? Because ideally would like local companies to participate and to be actively involved. And what's your take on that? The fact that this is one space that's dominated by foreign companies.
So I think specifically with the solar PV panel industry, it's very difficult for countries outside of China to compete with the type of things that are coming out of China. China obviously has cemented itself as having the efficiency. They're able to provide cheaper equipment. It's very difficult for new entrants to compete with that. This is something that in the South African context has been, the attempts has been to address it through the local content requirements in the large scale procurement that you'll see for energy projects. There's been some challenges because China, as they've been cemented themselves as a procurement, let's say a manufacturing country of choice, because they're very competitive, not necessarily because they offer the best product at all times. There are countries that can compete with them, but it's very difficult to compete with them at scale. But as they have been, active in that space, if you're coming in as a new entrant, you are competing with somebody who has access to capital to support, who's got the legislation in the country that supports the setting up of a manufacturing. So it's a very difficult one to almost critique because it's literally how the global markets are just set up. China is supplies pretty much everything. How we've tried to respond to that from a legislation perspective and how we structure our procurement programs is what has been supposed to aid, the setting up of manufacturing in South Africa.
Right.
In terms of the technology, where it comes to technology-specific panels and things like that, it's very difficult. So, but there's a lot of work to be done. I think the short answer is there's a lot of work to be done in that regard. And I think there's only 2 that have been able to set up in South Africa where they actually produce and manufacture panels themselves, but they still rely on imports as well. So it's a much more complicated thing to critique from a Yeah. What I picked up on with the solar function when I was walking through the exhibition itself, there are a lot of Chinese manufacturers that are looking for South African partners, to partner with so that they can meet the local content requirements when they want to participate to a government bid or a corporate procurement process, whatever the case may be. So people, I think, have to be a bit more open to the entrepreneurial side and saying, find the right partners, create the relationships, with international players, and find the funding partner that will support you to do that. And so it's.
Don't you think then, to a certain extent, the response from the foreign companies had to do with South Africa's preparedness for dealing with the energy crisis? I mentioned 2 policies in particular: the Just in Transition policy and also the Energy Action Plan. The Energy Action Plan outlined about 5 strategic outcomes, but I'll focus on 4 for now. The first one being enabling private sector investment in new generation capacity, accelerating procurement of new capacity from renewables, gas, battery storage, unleashing businesses and households to invest in rooftop solar, and transformation of the electricity sector. Clearly, if I'm sitting somewhere in China and I hear the president of South Africa talking about this energy action plan, I will look at South Africa as a potential market. 100%. Don't you think perhaps that's what led to a lot of foreign companies flooding the market and looking at opportunities that are being presented by this energy crisis?
I definitely agree with that, Denice. I think South Africa has been a pioneer in the African sector, in setting up that legislation that is quite invitational to foreign investors who see South Africa as an investment country of choice. Obviously, we are in an energy crisis, and we are also a signatory to the Paris Agreement in terms of meeting climate, making a change to the environment in support of the climate change commitments. So, and South Africa responded to that by making a number of changes. I think in the private sector, one of the points that you mentioned in the NECOM that now
enabling private sector investment.
The enablement, yes. So legislation there changed. That we've seen, policy certainty. I know we get a lot of slack as a country to say that, sometimes we create policy uncertainty, but I think in this case, the certainty is there. What has been a bit of a challenge for most players is just the timing and the execution ability, which is that's a topic on its own, I think. But the certainty, removing licensing requirements for new players, allowing grid access, determining access into the national grid, Eskom's national grid, which is, it supports the ability of private players to come into the space and say, I want to invest in a R1 billion project, in support of the energy crisis. So the certainty, definitely, it has been a positive aspect of what has led to manufacturers coming and assessing what is actually possible in South Africa. Because remember, they also have to design their products to meet the South African conditions. So from a manufacturing perspective, that's important. From an investment perspective, they come in and we've got a stable financial sector coming from at this point, coming from Nedbank. And we're quite open to funding projects that have reputable manufacturers, in their projects. So I think the short answer is that the certainty around policy, government has been quite, for me, has been quite positive in that regard, and that's been an invitational thing for.
Thanks for that. But let's go back to 2010 when the first IRP 2010 was actually introduced, and then IRP 2010 led to the opening of bid window 1 up to bid window 4, and I think that's when you guys started participating and financing some of those projects. Just tell us about your offering in as far as, supporting all those initiatives around, from 2010 up to 2016, where we are, where you are right now, and some of the challenges that you've experienced.
Sure. So initially, I wasn't in the bank at that time,
Right.
but definitely Nedbank was one of the pioneers in terms of financing new to bank projects in that space, because renewable energy was new to the country. This was an adoption of a new technology at scale. Tariffs were high and highly lucrative. Projects were showing very high IRRs in terms of returns for the equity players, and the money was available to invest into these projects. And up to round 4, the program was very successfully run, to the extent that, and we were not in crisis in terms of energy at that point. It was in response to future situations, I can call it that. So Nedbank was very willing and very able to structure products using project finance structuring, where creation of special purpose vehicles were made, which ring fenced the risk to the actual project, and you are able to leave the shareholders out of it, and you place reliance on the project performing itself. And the structuring of that, and we're able to issue very lucrative financing solutions in terms of debt, and we drew in. The industry was booming and very well executed. Then in terms of then the legislation that was happening, though, we don't want to talk into the politics of the era, but the delays that then happened after years.
Of course, we'll skip that part. But it's also important to know that the parties that are involved, in this case, the Department of Minerals and Energy, National Treasury, and the Development Bank of South Africa, established the IPP office, right, to drive some of these initiatives. But then a new MOA was agreed upon by all parties in May 2016 for an additional 3-year period, then again in April 2019 for another year, and then in March 2020, it was extended for an additional 3-year period up to 2023, of course, to support RP 2019, right? Because RP 2019 was promulgated around October or so. It was in support of all of that. We also saw the opening of bid window 5 as soon as RP 2019 was adopted. So tell us about your experience, because of course 2010 and 2019 up to now, we live in a different world. Energy availability factor dropped from 80% to 58%. And there's also energy crisis, not just here in South Africa, it's all over the world. So it's a different world that we're living in. So obviously, again, as a response to this crisis, Department of Minerals and Energy opened up the space, and they opened up bid window 5, 6, and 7. Tell us a little bit more about your involvement, particularly from a financing point of view, in all these projects.
So ours is to support developers or sponsors or clients that come and they say they want to participate in a government procurement program. So looking specifically at round 5 and round 6, round 7 is not out yet. We're looking to see it will be out here, but right now there's round 5, round 6, and the battery energy storage procurement. So when those developers come to us, we support them then by offering them a debt solution for their project, because these are very highly geared projects with up to 80% of the project funds coming from commercial lenders or development finance institutions like the DBSA, as you mentioned. So we will then engage at that stage to say, we start when an RFP is issued by government, we will start by issuing letters of credit to support those clients that are going in to submit their bids in part of their product. And typically these are clients that either in the books, it's new clients that are interested in supporting government's intentions of solving the energy crisis. So as then when the preferred bidders are announced, and those clients that we would have issued letters of credit of support to us, they come to us then, and we conduct a complete due diligence from financial, technical, legal, to assess the project itself for bankability, delving into the PPA that is going to be signed with government in this case, because these are government procurement programs, looking at the finance agreements that are going to be signed between ourselves, government, and the project itself. So our support doesn't just extend to just saying, here's some money, go build a project. We are deeply involved in doing an assessment of the bankability of the PPA, considering the termination regime that is included in that PPA. What happens if the government defaults on the project, or if the project itself defaults? What happens if there's a force majeure? There's some key security issues that we do a deep dive into. And also talking, linking it back to the solar show to say, what kind of technology are you going to be installing as part of your project? And we do an assessment of that as well. And then obviously when it comes to the financing of it, we offer the kind of terms that will still make the project bankable, looking at the financial model, how it's projecting its cash flows across the length of the PPA, which is up to 20 years. And then, and we offer ancillary products as well. Working capital is part of our offerings, subordinated loans as well. So it's an in-depth experience, and it's a journey that we walk with the client, not just from when they get awarded preferred bidder status, but way before, their intention to submit a bid as part of the program, as part of any of the program. And the structure is pretty much the same across any government procurement that they engage in.
I mean, for someone who is new to this energy sector, and they want to understand what is a power purchase agreement and how it works, what would you say to them? And why is it important for one to actually have a power purchase agreement, 100%. Particularly in terms of transacting with yourselves?
100%. So the power purchase agreement is the critical document in a project finance environment such as the ones that we operate in. Because if you remember, I mentioned that when we offer our funding solutions, we look only to the cash flows of the project. So in order for the project to project any sort of cash flows, you have to have signed a power purchase agreement, which indicates that you have a buyer for the power that you will be producing. And it typically we look for that to be a minimum of 7 years. It can be up to 30 years, but we structure our loan within that period to say you have secured, it's basically saying you've secured a client who's going to buy your product for the term of, for the life of the project itself. So it's a critical document. It dictates as well, the kind of protection that we are afforded as a lender between yourself and your buyer, because we have to take we are taking a long-term view on a project that you're constructing today, and we will be in that deal for up to 20 years. So it's a very important. I think that.
Just give us a few examples of some of the customers. Are we talking municipalities? Is it mining companies? Because we are talking long-term agreement and 15 to 25 years. But I mean, let's talk about municipalities as customers, because some of the municipalities, we know that they do not have the capacity to procure IPPs.
The municipal spaces is an interesting one, Denice, because it is not as established, obviously, as the national regime where we enjoy a government guarantee if the project fails. Municipalities also suffer from, there's some legislative limitations in terms of how long they can enter into a contract. So although you might come and you say you want to sign a long-term PPA, because of the MFMA, you might not be able to enter into an agreement with the municipality over a long duration of time, which then puts you at a bit of a disadvantage in terms of raising your ability to raise funds. But you can certainly have access to shorter term funding solutions, and then you can approach it from a portfolio, take a portfolio view on the project itself. You might be using municipality infrastructure, but your client might not necessarily be the municipality. So, for example, it might be a corporate, like you're saying, a mine. It might be a manufacturing, manufacturing client, or it might even be a retail, like a shopping center and things like that. So, in that space, that's where we're seeing an evolution of what we call what is called corporate PPAs. And in there, we still apply a similar view as we do with the government programs. And we're happy to engage clients who are looking to supply clients that are not sitting on ESCOM's infrastructure, for example, but sitting on municipality. And the principles are pretty much the same. But we just take a view on who you are as a sponsor and your ability to step in should something go wrong with the project, or because of the long-term nature, again, something goes wrong with the project in the long term. So it's an interesting space that we watch.
No, absolutely, because there are quite a number of variables that one to look at. I mean, for example, if the customer agrees to purchase the electricity at a fixed price, which is typically lower than the cost of electricity from non-renewables, and also the developer uses the revenue from the sale of electricity to pay off the debt.
Yes.
So interesting, your risk management approach. I mean, when you do your due diligence, I'll be interested to know how you tackle such.
100%. And that PPA becomes, again, the criticality of it, because within that PPA, what we term it as risk allocation, right? We want to make sure that everybody is well protected by the existence of that PPA. So there are some risks that we take as lenders, within reason, of course, as long as the project is maintained. And we actually also sometimes come into the negotiations by offer some advisory between the customer and the developer that's going to be constructing the project. So we offer some advisory in terms of making an assessment to say this risk is sufficiently allocated to the right party during the negotiation phase. So that's where also we offer that, that ancillary service as a lender to say, we've seen a couple of these things before. Once we've signed a non-disclosure agreement with you and we engaging at a project level, then we're able to offer much more in-depth assistance in structuring and making sure that all parties are as protected as they can be within the confines of the law and between, protecting both of us. So the risk allocation aspect is very important when you're negotiating a PPA, and you have to assume legal advice as well.
Very important.
Very important.
Nolukhanyo, the Integrated Resource Plan 2019, and like you mentioned, was promulgated in 2019. We lived in a different world back then. And we lived in a world where even if you were a risk management expert, you would not have known about the impact of COVID. You wouldn't have known about the invasion of Russia and Ukraine. You also would not have expected that load shedding would have such an impact on the economy of the country. So clearly, when we promulgated P 2019, we made certain assumptions. So don't you think energy experts out there need to revisit some of those assumptions to ensure that the RP 2019 stays relevant?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a fair point, Denice. I think when you compile a document that's supposed to be so forward-looking, you only can compile it with assumptions that are in front of you. And certainly the kind of changes that you're talking about, that are at such a macro level, they play a role in the kind of assumptions that you put in there. I understand that the RP 2019 actually is under revision currently by government because it is not reflective of our energy requirements as a country. It made certain assumptions around economic growth, which has not materialized, and that is in part it might have influenced the amount of capacity that is introduced from a generation perspective into the grid. And yet at the same time, we're seeing the inverse of that, is that load shedding is causing a regression in terms of the economic growth, which is then saying the energy requirements are not as high as what was anticipated looking at the original assumptions in the RP 2019. So it's certainly a document that needs a vigorous upgrade. We've not procured as much energy as we would have liked to see. What we've seen from a commercial perspective is that the delays in reaching financial close of round 5, the risk mitigation program, as well as some round 40 projects that delayed, also had a negative impact in the view that is placed on the RP 2019, because then, investors did start pulling out.
Absolutely.
That's where a bit of the uncertainty again comes in terms of execution ability, even though the document itself is well regarded. So we look forward to the new revision of the IRP 2019. I don't know why I keep saying 5. Of the 2019, we're hoping to see in an increase in the renewable energy requirements based on their ability to quickly come onto the grid, to support, to mitigate against load shedding, which is, I think everybody has an opinion on that, and none of that is positive, correct?
No, absolutely.
So we were looking for an increase in the allocation of renewable energy projects in there, and we're ready to fund those projects as a lender because South Africa needs the energy.
Absolutely. And I mean, looking at the target that has been set by our government for 2024, that is adding additional megawatts to our grid, and also the need to mitigate the risk of we've got about 5 power stations, I think, the next 2 years that have been decommissioned. And now you've just alluded to the delays in terms of financial close. And obviously that's going to delay the actual construction and implementation of all these projects. And that's ultimately will delay adding additional capacity to the grid. So what's your view on the next 2 to 3 years? Because that's really critical. On the one hand, power stations being commissioned. On the other side, there's delays. Even though we've progressed from bid window 5 to bid window 6, but it does not necessarily translate into additional megawatts.
So typically renewable energy projects have a 2-year construction period, which is far less than what you would see for a coal or a nuclear power station. And that I think in the immediate, in the short term, is the big selling point. It's one of the big selling points around what we see as a need to increase the allocation of renewable energy in the IRP 29 in the IRP. They are quick and easy to dispatch. And because we've already got the policy certainty and the experience of different rounds. I mean, I think round 4 was a bit of an exceptional case because of the timing, but generally with some of the REAP rounds, the time to reach financial close has been relatively met. The opinions differ in the market, and these are things that now we've come to understand, and we have the ability to deploy that capital. So striking that balance between decommissioning on the one end, which means you're reducing capacity that's available, and then you have to find a quick solution that that's going to be able to close that gap in the short term. Renewables then just make sense. What the electricity minister is communicating around delaying those decommissioning schedule is also something that we're watching closely, because it's going to impact how the new IRP looks like in terms of allocation. So it's a space that we're watching quite closely as well. We support, as Nedbank, our policy right now, unfortunately, is not to support fossil fuel. So even if coal were to be in the IRP, it's not something that we will be able to fund in the short term, just because that's the Nedbank policy at the moment. So we're looking forward to the new revision. We're looking forward to increased allocations. We're looking forward to, I think one of the things that maybe we can touch on, Denice, is around the grid constraints. Projects being placed in the right areas so that they can have the right access to the grid and be able to feed in those megawatt hours quickly and efficiently into the grid. That is something that we're also watching quite close in terms of how Eskom is looking to address the grid access and grid constraint issues that they're currently experiencing
Absolutely, a major constraint, because if you look at the Western Cape, you look at Northern Cape, all of
Eastern
that.
Cape is, there's some grid constraints.
There's some grid constraints. Any reason why areas like Mpumalanga, I mean, you've got very few IPP
in the Mpumalanga region. It's really because of the resource itself. The sun does not shine as strongly in the Mpumalanga region. The wind doesn't blow as wildly as it does in the Western Cape. So Western Cape, Eastern Cape, and the Northern Cape are the low-hanging fruits when it comes to well-behaved, predictable, let's call it predictable resource, being the solar and the wind for these type of projects. But obviously, again, because you've mentioned decommissioning, now you're starting to have easier grid access, which then starts to make the Mpumalanga region something that you need to look at, because South Africa is well endowed with sunlight and sunshine. So developers that are looking to build projects in the Mpumalanga region right now are being drawn by the availability of the grid, in spite of the solar resource being
absolutely.
So
and also the repurposing of some of these power stations.
Exactly.
I hear they're looking at gas as well.
Gas.
We're looking at I think already Komati
has been repurposed to battery and a bit of gas. I'm not sure how
so that space will open up.
Yes, 100%. And as you decommissioning, like I'm saying, those connection points are existing in that region. It's gonna be a big draw card for project developers who are looking to enter into the space.
Well, Ms. Nolukhanyo Mqhayi, thank you so much for your contribution to this program. Much appreciated. And you're an associate principal responsible for energy finance, Nedbank. Thank you very much.
100%. Thank you so much, Denice.
Okay.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks.